Hello, bonjour and welcome to your new wine video. I'm your host Julien and today we are concluding our three-part series covering everything that you should know about the aging of wine. And this part 3 is arguably the most important, as we are going to find out how long you should age or cellar your wines for and why. In part 1 we looked at which wine you should store for aging or not, and then in part 2 we looked at what happens when a wine evolves over time. Now that we've got this understanding, let's get a little more practical and find out how to store your wine and exactly how long for. As always, I will be breaking things down into 3 small chapters for you. Let's go! My fellow wine-loving friends, Julien here. Before we get started with the video, there is something that you have to know about. This video was made possible by the Bonner Private Wine Partnership, and the reason I work with them is not just because it's been called the most unique wine club in America, but because they truly love the wines that they choose for you. Founded by Will Bonner, the partnership is a small group of wine lovers who have come together to import excellent small batch wines that might otherwise get completely overlooked by large importers. They get them. Right now you can get your hands on 3 rare extreme altitude red wines from Argentina, from some of the purest, highest vineyards in the entire world, way up in the Andes Mountains. No middlemen, no additive packed supermarket wines here, no inflated cost. Plus you'll get exclusive access to more wine education videos from me, just like the one you're about to watch, to make sure you become an educated wine connoisseur. So make sure to check out the link in the video description to see if you want to become partner in something truly special in the world of wine. But for now, back to your video. Before we get absolutely practical about wine aging, and I promise we will, one last fundamental but utterly important piece of theory. We saw in our last video last week that any wine and every wine starts its life cycle with vibrant notes of fruit that come from the grapes themselves, to evolve towards more complex, deep, varied aromas, adding to the fruit flavors notes of mixed spices, earthy characters, ashy tones, animal traits, etc. etc. We say that wine goes from being upfront fruity when it's young because there's a lot of fruit exploding on your palate, but then that dissipates relatively quickly as you taste, to become more layered, more complex and longer on the back of your palate because of the bouquet of an aged wine stick to your palate for longer and goes deeper into your senses, providing a more sophisticated, a more enjoyable tasting experience to those who can appreciate it. Only wine has this ability to provide so many layers and so many different types of aromas, all packed into a single glass of wine. If you age a wine for too long, it will lose the freshness and the appeal, the vibrancy of its initial fruity personality. Essentially, a given wine will increase in quality in the first phase of its aging, then reach a peak from which it will then slowly start decreasing in brightness. It essentially follows a parabolic curve, going up in quality and then down again. Although not quite a perfect parabolic curve, if you know what I'm talking about, as it goes up relatively quickly and then slowly starts going down in quality over a relatively long period of time. Now, how quickly a wine will reach its peak and how long it will stay up there on that plateau at the top and how fast it will start degrading depends on 3 factors. First, the storage conditions, then the type of closure, what closes the bottle of wine, what taps it, and then obviously the type of wine. So let's have a look at those specifically. Now let's keep things rather simple here because there's a lot to say around storage conditions, but I'll summarize things and keep them relatively simple for you. Here are a few essentials to know about wine storage conditions. First off, wine bottles get stored on their side and away from light. Never leave a bottle of wine standing for a long period of time, and there's the risk that the cork dries up and lets too much air into the bottle, which will quickly destroy the freshness of the wine. If a wine is bottled under screw cap, you know those screw cap closure systems, this is much less of an issue. Now light, and there's a lot of light here, so that's not excellent, but the photons of light break down the good molecules that make a wine taste good, essentially the tannins as well as the aromas. And that's just as simple as this. The light destroys what's in the wine or breaks it down, and it doesn't taste all the same. But the glass of a bottle of wine is generally tainted and it's dark to prevent light, and UV light in particular, to reach while inside the bottle and the wine itself. Yet some light will slowly get through the glass a little bit. So as little light exposure you can give your bottles, the better they will handle time. And this is particularly true with transparent glass bottles, just like this one, which generally contain wines that are to be drunk young anyway, like light whites and rosés. Now, the most important part of storage conditions is obviously the temperature of your wine storage room or fridge. The ideal cellar temperature, to summarize, for a slow and harmonious aging is 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's pretty cool. Cooler than most non-air conditioned rooms anyway. It's interesting to note that these 55 degrees happens to be more or less the natural temperature of those deep underground cellars by some sort of coincidence. Now you must be thinking, oops, my storage room is really not that cool. Well, let's say that up to 65 degrees Fahrenheit your wine is not as at risk of fast premature evolution. It's just that at 65 degrees the wine will evolve just faster than at 55, which is not necessarily a bad thing because your wine will be ready to drink sooner. But 55 degrees is for really serious wine collectors who really intend to age their wine for a very, very long time. And it's important to know that the slower the aging, so the lower the temperature, the more harmonious the wine will be after aging. More important than worrying too much about achieving these perfect 55 degrees is to avoid rapid, extreme or frequent changes of temperature or temperature swings. So generally speaking, the coolest and darkest room in your house or apartment will do just fine, unless you are a very serious wine collector, in which case obviously you'll need to invest in a wine fridge or a dedicated air-conditioned wine cellar. A very quick word on humidity. 70% humidity level is the target to avoid the wine from evaporating too quickly and the level of the wine dropping and leaving space for air to get inside the bottles. That's if your room is too dry. If humidity is too high, there's a risk of mold eating up your cork and your cork molding. Unfortunately, there is not a rule of thumb that I can give you here or an easy snap answer to that question. Every wine is essentially different. As we saw in part 1 of this series, most affordable wines are to be aged or not to be aged over 2 or 3 years, the minimum conservation time for pretty much any wine. Most wines between say $40 and $100 can be aged and will better with an aging between say 5 and 10 years. Generally speaking, only the premium expensive wines, say over $100, can be aged more than 10 years and are intended to be aged for such an amount of time. And that's also why they are expensive, because they are collectible. Now, it also depends how aged or how matured you like your wine personally. Are you the type of person who likes pungent flavors of fruit, from the grapes, the red berries, from red wines, or the peach and apricots on white wines? Or do you like your truffle, your leather, the deep notes of evolution, your beeswax, all those aromas that we talked about in the previous video about old wine? It's generally considered that a wine has reached its peak of quality when both sides, the fruity side and the developed side, are both present harmoniously, when a wine tastes and smells like it was when it was very young, or the fresh fruit characters from the grapes, and it also tastes and smells like it will be when it will be an old evolved wine, and when both those sides are compact into the same glass of wine, united harmoniously. So how do you know when is the perfect time to drink a bottle of wine? Well, first I would recommend ask your retailer to give you that range of potential aging. Is it going to be 2 or 3 years, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, or 10 plus? Or you can always ask the producer himself. He's going to be the one knowing exactly how his wines evolve and how they age, and it's going to be able to give you some recommendations. Good, kind producers, and there's many out there, will give you that information. Or you can always look at online wine reviews. Many wine blogs like the one I run or online magazines give that information about the wines that we've tasted. Then I'm afraid the only way to really know how you yourself personally specifically like and enjoy a specific wine is to have several bottles of it and try them. You can open one to taste while it's relatively young to see where it's at, and then you experience its evolution, opening a bottle every year, for example, or every second year to see how it's moving. And this is why collectors often buy a case of 6 or 12 bottles of exactly the same wine, so they can watch it grow a bit like a child and enjoy every phase of its evolution. So if you've liked a wine at a restaurant, at a tasting, or as part of the Bonner Wine Club selection, for example, well, I would suggest buying a few bottles of it for aging. If I personally know the wine, I would happily give you my thoughts on its aging potential and how long to keep it for. Voila, I think this is pretty much everything I could tell you to stay simple about the aging of wine. I hope you enjoyed this trilogy on wine aging, and I hope all your questions on that topic have been answered. And essentially, I will see you soon with the next video, and I will see you soon in the wonderful world of wine. Cheers! Santé!